This would be a good time for you to grab your sermon outline, and we're going to continue on our series today called Fearful and Faithful. And today's title is called Wilderness Training. You might have noticed that we have the passages that were read in our service today were from Psalm 116 and then from 1 Timothy, and kind of seem far removed from Exodus 2 and the life of Moses. But we're looking at kind of considering the question, what kind of people does God want to use? What kind of people does God use to extend his kingdom here on earth? A verse that I brought up last week, Psalm 90, verse 12, says these words, "Teach us to number our days that we may gain a heart of wisdom." One of the things that I think has happened in our culture right now is that a lot of us have been destabilized. We've always thought about growing old and perhaps dying when we're older, but with the COVID-19 and most recently here in Nova Scotia with the tragedy this past weekend, death has been brought closer to us. A friend of mine used this term when he talked about his own health crisis that ended him being in intensive care for, I think, 47 days or something along those lines. He talked about the thinning of the veil. The thinning of the veil. Being really close to eternity and the way that impacts us and our thinking about our lives. Moses says in Psalm 90, verse 12, "Teach us to number our days that we may gain a heart of wisdom." What does God want you to do with your life? What does God want you to do right now in your neighborhood, in your community, in regards to what is happening with the COVID-19? I told us last week as we started off this series called Fearful and Faithful, we had no idea that this thing was coming down the pipe when it did. But here we are. One of the things I'm convinced about, though, is God uses regular people like you and me for his kingdom work. And in fact, as we go through this study on the life of Moses, we're going to find out that Moses, while he was a great leader, he did some tremendous things, he also had some incredible faults that we're going to be looking at today. I encourage you to have your Bibles open. We're going to be looking at Exodus chapter 2, verses 11 to the end of the chapter today. The passage that Paula read just a little bit earlier was about the Apostle Paul. And the Apostle Paul says these words about himself. "Here's a trustworthy saying that deserves full acceptance. Christ Jesus came into the world to save sinners, of whom I am the worst." Pretty powerful words from the great apostle. The Apostle Paul, and I would say as we look at this study on the life of Moses, were two people who had a kind of a clear sense of their own failings and their own faults. Well, guess what? You don't have to be perfect to be used by God. Last week I told you this story about, this quote from Dwight Moody about Moses. Moses spent his first 40 years thinking he was somebody. He spent his second 40 years learning that he was a nobody. And he spent his third 40 years discovering what God can do with a nobody. And that's, I think, my prayer for us as we go through this study on the life of Moses, is that we will be encouraged as people of faith to understand what God might be calling for us to do to step up and kind of engage in our culture and in our society. In verse 11, it says, "One day after Moses had grown up, he went out to where his people were and watched them at their hard labor." This, the span of time between verse 10 and verse 11 is about 40 years, we're told from the book of Acts. So Moses has been growing up in the palace as the adopted son of the daughter of Pharaoh, enjoying probably all the best things in life. And then we get this story that we will be kind of going through this morning. Moses goes out to where his people are, and he sees something that's taking place. He sees an Egyptian leader, a slave owner, slave master, brutally attacking another one of the Hebrew people. And Moses does something about it. He saw him being beaten. One of his own people were told in verse 11. "And looking this way and that and seeing no one." So Moses did this. He looked this way and that way. He saw no one around him. Moses killed the Egyptian. Let's just pause there for a moment. He didn't slap the Egyptian. He didn't knock him over. He killed him, which is an awful thing to have done. And then he tried to hide it, and he put him in the sand, we're told in this passage. And one of the very strong ideas I get from this passage is this: God works through failures and mess-ups. Moses didn't have his life all together. He was obviously impulsive. He was combative. He was a murderer. But God still has used him. And I think we need to really grab hold of this idea in our own lives, that we don't have to have it all together to be used by God. God works through failures and mess-ups. In other words, be yourself. Moses tried to hide this thing that he did by burying the Egyptian, but the word gets out. We're told the next day he comes back and he sees a couple of Hebrew slaves kind of fighting with each other, and he tries to intervene, and they let him know, well, we know what you did to the Egyptian. Are you going to do that to us as well? And then Moses was afraid, and he ran for his life. God is always working through. When I was working on this sermon outline, I'm not sure if I think it should say God works with failures or works alongside, but no, God works through failures and mess-ups. And this could be a great encouragement to all of us. No matter what you've done, no matter what sort of a mess you've made in your life, God can still use you right now in kingdom work. We're told in verse 15, when Pharaoh heard about this, he tried to kill Moses. But Moses fled from Pharaoh and went to live in Midian, where he sat down by a well. What a change of circumstance for Moses. What a radical change from living in the palace, enjoying probably the best of life, to having nothing and sitting by a well. But God wasn't over with him yet. God still had something definitely for Moses to do. He went from being a somebody, thinking he was a somebody, to learning that he was a nobody, to learning that what God can do with a nobody in the next 40 years. The other kind of thought I get when I interact with these passages, these verses in Exodus 2, is that God's timing is crucial. Indeed, God had big plans for Moses, but it wasn't the kind of timetable that Moses had in store for himself. And so the idea here is God's timing is crucial. Be patient. Now, this is something that I could relate to. I was asked last week by some people, when would you like this list back to you? And I said, well, yesterday. Often I want things right away or instantly, just like that. But God's timing is different. And sometimes it's hard to wait. Sometimes it's hard to be patient, waiting for God to do something. But here is Moses, stuck now in Midian, sitting beside a well, watching the locals do their thing. And we're told in this passage in Exodus 2 that 7 daughters come with their sheep to the well so they could water the sheep. And what happens is the other shepherds in the area chase the women away, chase the girls away along with their sheep, and don't allow them to be watered. But Moses does something that is quite courageous. He steps up and he does something. We're told in verse 17, some shepherds came along and drove them away, but Moses got up and came to their rescue and watered the flock. This brings to me another idea that we can get from this passage. God works through failures and mess-ups. God's timing is crucial. And that God uses small things to develop us. That's kind of hard, right? Sometimes we want to do the big thing, the dramatic thing. Be in a position of power and influence, whether it's in government or doing some local thing in your community. But God is saying, I think in this story, do the little thing. Some of us are asking right now, what can I do to show God's love? We sang this song, fill me with your heart and lead me in love to those around me. What might God be calling you to do in the midst of this crisis? It might be something really small. In Moses' case, we're told in verse 17, but Moses got up and came to their rescue and watered their flocks. It wasn't a big, political thing that he did, a big leadership leading his people out. He had to humble himself. So I want us to really be creative in this and thinking about this. How within your own family can you show humility? How within your own neighborhood can you show humility? How can you in your workplace, if you're still working right now, show humility? And this is, I think, the way, part of the story that we get from this passage. God works through failures and mess-ups. God's timing is crucial. God uses small things to develop us. And God uses the wilderness to deepen us. Does what is happening right now feel like a wilderness experience for you? And are you trying in any way you can to get away from it? Social distancing, not be able to connect with family and friends, not be able to come and worship here at Grace Chapel on a Sunday morning. Is that difficult? Is it a wilderness experience for you right now because your workplace has called you and said, we no longer need your services? Is it a wilderness experience right now because the company that you've been working at and working for, you're self-employed for so long, is now on the brink and you're not sure what is going to happen? Is it a wilderness experience because you're concerned about your health and what's going to take place in your life or in the lives of your loved ones right now? And I know the stories. I know our stories, and you could all be saying yes to many of these things, maybe to all of them for some of us. But God had a purpose in bringing Moses out into the wilderness. And it was to deepen him and to shape him and to prepare him for what God had in store for his future. And when I think about God calling us, using the wilderness to deepen us right now, it's an opportunity for us to be more fully present. One of the things I've kind of just as a little thing, I love sports. But for the past 5 weeks, how many times can you see a repeat of a football game from a couple of years ago, or a tennis match, or a hockey game? God is giving me an opportunity right now to use this time to be more fully present with God in a different way, to grow and to deepen. Yeah, it's hard, it's uncomfortable, it's different. It's strange for me to be here in the foyer at Grace Chapel and just have Ethan and his dad here to help out. I wish we were all together. But we are growing deeper as a people. I heard a story this week of one of our prayer partners, or part of our prayer team, and what's happening right now. Some people are going and calling people up from Grace Chapel, and she told me how encouraging it is to make these calls. So even though we're in the wilderness of not being able to be together, we could do some great things in coming together like this. Wilderness training. God works through failures and mess-ups. I was reminded of the story of Chuck Colson. Chuck Colson was the Richard Nixon's special counsel, legal counsel. This is back when President Nixon was in charge of the United States of America. And Chuck Colson ended up in a lot of trouble. He pled guilty to an obstruction charge. He ended up going to prison, got disbarred as a lawyer. But he pled guilty because all of a sudden his life was being changed. He used to say, I would walk over my own grandmother in order to get Richard Nixon reelected. He was a self-described hatchet man for Nixon. But when his life started to change, when God started to reach into his life and bring about a change, he realized that he had to plead guilty. He said these words, "It was a price I had to pay to complete the shedding of my old life and to be free to live a new one." And perhaps this wilderness that we're in is an opportunity for us to reorient, refocus, and move in a new direction. Not just as individuals, but perhaps as a church community, perhaps as a whole society as well. We're ripe for a time of change. One person, his biographer, talking about Chuck Colson, said these words: "He transferred his huge drive, intellect, and maniacal energy from the service of Richard Nixon to the service of Jesus Christ." Wow, what a change has taken place. We're told in Exodus 2, verse 22, Zipporah, that's Moses' wife, gave birth to a son, and Moses named him Gershom, saying, I've become a foreigner in a foreign land. And perhaps that's the way you're feeling right now, where everything is different. And you're not sure how it's going to work out. But I want to encourage you that perhaps that this is wilderness training time, where the Lord is taking us as his people and giving us maybe a different focus, a different energy, a different direction. And God will do great things through us. The last 3 verses of chapter 2 are definitely worth looking at because they set the scene for the rest of our study on being fearful and faithful. During that long period, the king of Egypt died. The Israelites groaned in their slavery and cried out, and their cry for help because of their slavery went up to God. God heard their groaning, and he remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. So God looked on the Israelites and was concerned about them. These are good words for us to keep in mind. All the difficulties that we're going through as a people and as a society, these groans and concerns are going up to our loving Heavenly Father, and God is doing something about it. What? I don't really know. The last sentence of chapter 2 says, So God looked at the Israelites and was concerned about them. And we have the benefit of knowing, in a sense, the rest of the story because in a short period of time, we're going to hear about it next Sunday. Joanne's going to be bringing that message for us. God had a plan to use a broken person, a failure and a mess up like Moses, to do something for the people of God. God had a plan and timing for this event to take place. God was using small things to develop Moses, and God was using this wilderness experience to prepare him to be the leader to go out into the world. We're going to sing a song right now that has some beautiful words in it. You unravel me with a melody. You surround me with a song of deliverance from my enemies till all my fears are gone. What are you afraid of right now? You split the sea so I could walk right through it. My fears were drowned in perfect love. You rescued me so I could stand and sing, I am a child of God. Let's sing this together now.